In an op-ed for The Hill, Biden's poor TV ratings against Trump is exactly what this administration wants. Oh, you guys ever watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia? There's an episode where they want to get in shape. And if you're not familiar with the show, it's about four sociopaths, basically, who are not particularly smart. Anyway, I digress. Two of the characters, Dee and Dennis, decide that they're going to get in shape. And they decide before they start exercising at the gym, they're going to take supplements. Dee then mentions that she's been having extreme bowel movements, to put it mildly. And Dennis says, on the contrary, he hasn't had any at all. He goes on to explain this away, saying, oh, for you, it's your body flushing out the toxins. That's why you're in the bathroom so often. And for me, my body's now so efficient, it's using everything. Obviously, those are not good outcomes. And I bring this analogy up because we have a story where The Hill, Joe Concha, writes an opinion piece where it's like Biden's miserable ratings and network viewership clips. It's perfect. It means it's working. I love that. When people take these like pseudo-scientific, like not real holistic, like holistic medicine, people will be like, oh, if you take this weird, root, it will make you vomit everything up, which proves you're flushing out the toxins. Like, no, maybe it's making you sick. Anyway, I digress. This reminds me of that. Biden is failing. It's so miserable. Nobody cares. Maybe that's a good thing, and lull people back to sleep, I suppose. I think civic engagement would be very, very important. But maybe it's true. Maybe it is exactly what they want. Or maybe they're losing. Maybe the establishment can't maintain a hold. We all know the Oscar ratings have collapsed. We know that Biden's speech ratings collapsed. No one cares. Donald Trump was their existential threat. They go nuts, and with Donald Trump, people come out and they vote. With Joe Biden now, as I've said before, you can't have a government built upon hating someone else because other is not a focal point for politics. Like, not that. Okay, that's what are you voting for? Not that. Well, what is this guy going to do when he gets in? No one cares. Even if what he's doing is horrifying. But I love it. The ratings are collapsing. That means it's working. Here's what Joe writes for The Hill. The 45th president was fairly obsessed with ratings, giving Donald Trump's experience as a TV reality show star that is not terribly surprising. He then goes on to mention Trump tweeting 44 times. Honestly, I don't care about Trump. Trump's obsessed with ratings. I don't care. He says you get the point. Trump saw big ratings as a sign of big love. Truth was and still is the former Apprentice star and real estate mogul was a modern version of the late Howard Cosell, who in the 1970s TV Guide poll was voted as simultaneously the most liked and disliked man in America. That sums up the ratings explosion during the Trump presidency, in which a rising tide, tsunami, lifted all media boats in terms of ratings and clicks to heights we may never see again. So it was no surprise to see President Biden's ratings fall far short of Trump's in the viewership department after he finally gave an address to a joint session of Congress. The differential was staggering. For Trump's 2017 address, a joint session, 48 million people tuned in. For Biden, 26.9. I know they rounded up. For a guy who received more votes than any presidential candidate in U.S. history, it would seem on the surface that this would be seen internally bad news for Team Biden. But this seems to be exactly what they want, a stealth presidency. Oh, they want no one to care and pay attention. Okay, the reason why I don't believe that and think this argument is dumb is that Trump supporters and conservatives are still active, freaking out and fighting back against wokeness. And maybe this is why many people are starting to push back on the critical race theory, because without prominent media play, traditional liberals go back to sleep as we always see it. You've heard the story from me. I voted for Barack H. Obama in 2008, and I was excited. I mean, kind of excited. I wasn't, I wouldn't say I was particularly well versed for the most part, but I was like, all right, he says he wants to end the war and all that stuff. Everybody was protesting this war and George W. Bush, and so I was like, all right, I'll vote for this guy. So I did. And Obama just kept the war stuff going. And all of a sudden, all those activists who were anti-war just sort of disappeared. Well, what are we going to do? In fact, I think one of the biggest weaknesses of the Democratic Party is that once their president gets in, they stop paying attention. They don't care anymore. And then it allows a Trump to get elected. Nobody liked Hillary Clinton. So what's happening now? With no interest enough to pay attention to what Biden is doing, the Republicans can go on the offensive. Not that I think Mitch McConnell and, Lindsey Graham and some of these other Republican, they're higher up, more well known. McConnell's basically the leader of the party. Although I think Trump is, in office. It gives room for a lot of local level politicians. It gives room for Ron DeSantis. The left stops fighting back to a certain degree. Without support from traditional liberals, the woke extremists have trouble pushing things through. And the socialist far left economic type individuals also have trouble because they need the liberals whom they so hate. Conservatives are sitting here watching, angry. Disaffected liberals are sitting here watching, angry. Joe Biden does not do enough to rally anyone. Sorry. Here's what they say. It would seem to be bad news, but this seems to be exactly what they want: a stealth presidency. One that is tightly scripted and taking the protagonist off the stage while maintaining all the power he has as a leader of the free world, whose party also happens to have control of the House and the Senate. Despite the promises we heard at the beginning of his administration that Biden would be the most honest, transparent president we've seen in modern times, the plan appears to be avoid being the center of attention, given how poorly the president does when speaking away from a teleprompter. It is understandable why, although it doesn't remotely excuse avoiding accountability and scrutiny. No, what I think happened was Joe Biden is their silver medal. I know a lot of people said, no, Tim, he's a participation trophy, but that would imply they didn't win. They won, but not with what they wanted. Biden was not who they wanted. I think they would rather have Kamala Harris. Unfortunately for them, you end up with Joe Biden. It was the best they could do, and boy, is that sad. Now, the best they could do was Joe Biden. Why? Because Joe Biden didn't make anybody freak out or angry. His son did. Conservatives were paying attention, but traditional liberals were like, I don't know, whatever, Biden. Donald Trump, bad. Well, now you don't have a Donald Trump. This is one of the reasons why I think Trump shouldn't run in 2024, at least as of right now. Ron DeSantis is slaying it down in Florida. Everyone seems to be really excited for what he's doing. And Donald Trump is extremely, what's the right word? I can't think of the right word. Like, I don't want to say volatile, but explosive. You know what I mean? That if Donald Trump runs again, then all of a sudden the traditional liberals are going to bubble up and lose their minds. And if the Republicans actually want to make gains and push back on the critical race theory, the insanity, the far left propaganda, you need a DeSantis, because they're not going to be able to pull off on DeSantis what they did to Trump. Trump does say bombastic things. Trump is headstrong and arrogant. I'm not saying Ron DeSantis isn't, but I think Ron DeSantis is more controlled. They say overall, during Biden's first 100 days, here's the best part. MSNBC has seen its viewership drop from an average of 1.3 million viewers in the last week of January to 868,000. CNN has plummeted from 1.2 on average to just 749,000. On the online and print side, it's the same deal, with clicks down significantly at most publications. I'll just point out that on my end, we've not really seen it. I mean, there was a period, I think, maybe just after the inauguration, views took a little bit of a dip. For the most part, everything seems to be pretty standard for this time of year. So overall, all in all, for me, views did go down a bit. I did stop working quite a bit. I produce less segments nowadays, focusing on other things like the vlog. But this is normal for this time of year on YouTube, and everything's tracking fairly normally, as far as I can tell, doing way better than we did last year. Granted, in August, September, October, November, ratings were through the roof. That to me is static. It's a blip. With MSNBC, I mean, they were averaging these numbers like for a couple of years, for a while, and Fox News was skyrocketing. They're plummeting. My network's actually doing fairly well. I don't know if it's just me. Maybe it's because we have more room to grow and they don't. It's possible. But the ratings are in the gutter because people are just sick of this. And I'll tell you what, you look at some of my videos, and I track this stuff, talking about Trump and talking about January 6th and talking about old news doesn't rate well. This is the problem for Biden. This is the problem for MSNBC and for CNN. They hit a wall. On January 20th, they didn't have Trump anymore. So they just stop right there. What's the biggest thing we can do? What can we cover? January 6th. No one cares. I know this. There have been some big stories that I thought were important to cover, and then I cover them, and surprise, surprise, ratings are down. And I'd be like, wow, I guess people don't really care all that much about what happened on the 6th or Donald Trump. There was one related to the officer who lost his life, and it was a big update. I covered it. Nobody cared. So I was like, well, if it's important and I think it's important, I'll talk about it. Even though I know that most people probably aren't going to want to watch something from almost 4 months ago now, but they're still talking about it. Why would someone turn on the TV to hear about 4-month-old news? Oh, but there's developments. I don't care. Been there, done that. What's happening now? There are riots on the West Coast. So yeah, they don't care. I think most of us moved on. But CNN, MSNBC, they're trapped in a time bubble. They can't leave this space. They can't talk about Joe Biden. I talk about Joe Biden. Views do pretty well. Why? Because I'm talking about him honestly. People care. But maybe it's because traditional liberals went to sleep, and this is the real issue. Maybe the reason why my channels are still growing, we just broke 1 million subscribers over at Timcast IRL only a couple weeks ago. Our viewership is doing pretty well. Now, granted, our live viewership during the election was insane, but we're well above where we were the year before. We're still growing. Maybe ratings overall are down for everybody. For us, they're going up. Comes and goes in waves. Could it be that the only reason people were watching MSNBC and CNN is because Trump was annoying them? And traditional liberals, people who normally don't pay attention, started to? Could it be partly the lockdown? And now that's all going away. And maybe the reason my channels are still growing is because disaffected liberals, moderates, anti-SJW types, conservatives, and whatever you may be, are active and paying attention. And it's not the whims and tides of the orange man that determine whether or not we focus on politics and care about what's happening to our country and our world. And thus the Democrats have a very serious disadvantage. And of course, you'll then get but maybe they want bad ratings. It's a good thing. Oh, yeah? TV news ratings, online readership plunge during Biden's first days. Timcast is growing like crazy. Maybe it's because we just have room to grow, right? I think it's maybe a fair point. We've never been a massive, Vice size enterprise. So starting a new site, we see massive growth. It's because, if there's 1 billion total viewers and everyone splits them and it drops to 500 million, we're still nowhere near that. So maybe we can still grow as other channels can't, CNN. But maybe it's not fair to say because CNN's not been, doing all that well. But I do find it funny just how miserable everything is. Now, you can say it's because people don't like Biden. You can say it's because Biden's bad on TV, so they keep him off TV. They don't want him answering questions. You can say maybe they really want low ratings. I do think it's that something should be entertained to be brought up. The less people pay attention to what Biden is doing, the more he can get away with. Yeah, I think it was the Washington Post announced that they were no longer going to be running the presidential fact-checking database. That's right. Joe Biden's going to do whatever he wants. Or maybe it's because they couldn't afford it. Maybe the ratings are gone and Joe Biden doesn't talk enough to justify them actually paying people to fact check Joe Biden when he's not saying things. Could that be it? Ultimately, it's bad for Biden. Traditional liberals will stop paying attention. There's no news to get them all riled up. Then 2022 comes. About a year and a half. We're going to see this election. We're going to see Republicans make an attempt to gain the House back. I think there's a probability. I'm not sure who's running in 2022 for the Senate, but I think some Senate seats will be up, and there's a possibility Republicans could actually take the Senate back if by only one seat. But what I do find interesting is how people are starting to push back on wokeness, how they're not having it. In my previous segment, I was talking about how critical race theory failing. In Texas, I think it's in Texas, a community voted overwhelmingly to say no to these curriculums. And it could be that without Donald Trump, the left doesn't muster up a battle. It may be the best thing for the anti-woke and for Trump supporters is that Joe Biden won. I mean it, but hear me out. I'm saying maybe, not definitively. Joe Biden's going to do a lot of bad things. The Democrats have the Senate by the tiebreaker with Kamala Harris, and they have the House, and they're going to try and pass through everything they can. But they know that by holding this very thin and flimsy amount of power, because it's marginal, it's very, very slim, at least with Manchin out of West Virginia, Democrat, they're going to struggle to get through everything they want. The problem is traditional libs are going to be like, we won, we did it, go back to sleep. Now, it's not a powerful hold the Democrats have. If the Democrats had like 60 seats in the Senate and, like 70% of the House and the presidency, they'd be just crushing everything. But they have a very, very slim grip on their power. So they can't do as much as they'd want to, but still it's enough so that traditional libs stop paying attention. Now come 2022. They're not going to be able to muster up the fight against these Republicans because Trump ain't there. If Trump starts doing his MAGA rallies again, they might. It's tough, isn't it? Maybe you need Trump to rally people on the right, but I'll tell you, the left certainly needs Trump to rally people on the left. The left on the Democratic side. Over in TV land, their ratings are plummeting. If Trump can just stay out of the limelight for a little while, it'll effectively starve out these media companies. I mean, take a look at this. CNN called out for using out-of-date story to hide ratings collapse. Can't get more fake news than that. Liberal network promotes 3-month-old story touting brief ratings spike. Wow. CNN's media page, which constantly updated, featured a story from January 16th by in-house media pundit Brian Stelter, boasting the network's ratings were soaring amid realignment in TV news. The 3-month-old story occupied key real estate on CNN's media page, even getting a photograph to accompany the story placed next to recently updated stories. Amazing. The out-of-date analysis claims CNN's ratings were surging to historic levels, but it doesn't inform readers the network has since taken a nosedive. Which brings me to today. I'm sorry, this is from last week. Viewers flee CNN during Jim Acosta's new weekend show after network's ratings suffer. Acosta hosted edition of CNN Newsroom is down 40% in key viewership categories compared to the same time slot in 2022. You did it to yourself. See, I was right about this. I said that the best thing in the world for CNN is for Donald Trump to get reelected because they need him for ratings. And without him, they can't do anything. Nobody cares. Over the past 4 years, I would say more than 4 years ago, CNN did have an audience of people who watched them for news. I know this because I was one of them. I would turn on CNN and they'd be talking about the news, and it was silly and they're pretty bad at what they do, but they would talk about news. They would talk about riots, weather and, severe weather and things like that. Then along came Trump. And they realized it was cheaper to not send people out. I think this is best exemplified or proven with a Project Veritas expose, where a CNN employee says they used to go out on the ground. They used to report the news. I remember when I saw that video from Veritas, and I'm thinking like, yeah, they did used to go. There's like pictures of Anderson Cooper out in waders standing in floodwaters, and, they were in Ferguson. Did they really stop going on the ground? And then I went and looked. For the most part, they did. Now, recently, CNN does have people who go on the ground still. Don't get me wrong. But I would turn on CNN and it would just be like a panel about Trump. This drove me away. I'm not saying I was a fan of CNN. I just have them on in the event breaking news happened. Now, I'm not convinced they'd even cover breaking news, so what's the point? I used to just have it running in the background. So while I'm working, if something happened, they'd be like, breaking news, we've got X. And I'd be like, whoa, and I'd look it up and try and figure out what's going on. Then they just started talking about Trump all day, every day, nonstop. And I'm like, dude, I don't care. I get it. Orange man bad. So I turned it off, switched over to Fox News. Boy, Fox News in the morning had some silly segments. They had one guy come on a couple years ago saying that evolution wasn't real. Sure, whatever. Fox News, you can do what you want to do. But I was like, at least they're talking about things. At least they're saying a protest happened here and the cop said this. And there was some silly, hokey morning stuff. But I turned off CNN because I wasn't getting news. Now, their ratings were still going up, even though someone like me doesn't want to watch it anymore. How is that possible? Because the orange man bad narrative was working. They may have lost a viewer like me, but they gained 2 more Trump derangement viewers. Okay. So what happens then when Trump is gone? I'm not going back. Why would I turn CNN on again? That's a waste of my time. And their Trump derangement viewers left. So there you go. It's like eating the fruit of the poison tree. They saw that sweet, delicious fruit, and it tasted so good. But what is it? What is that thing called? La manzana de arbol de los huertos or something. I can't speak Spanish. The manzanita. La manzanita de arbol de los muertos. Maybe I'm getting it wrong. It's the little apple of the tree of death. And apparently they have these in Florida. I went on like a boat ride through like the Everglades or whatever. And they talk about this tree with this fruit that's supposedly sweet. And it's extremely toxic and corrosive and kills you if you eat it. That's what it was. So apparently the Native Americans in Florida, they would tie people to the tree. So when it rained, the toxins or whatever, the corrosive would like rain down. It's a horrifying story. The tree of death, the little apple of the tree of death or whatever it's called. Or the little apple of death is another thing. I don't know. I don't speak Spanish. But it's funny. CNN saw this tree and they were hungry. And they said, it's easy. We can take this fruit. And they grabbed a bunch of it. And they all bit into it. And it tasted so good. Supposedly, one person took a bite of it and it was sweet. And then they like died or something. I don't know. Legends, urban legends, whatever. Or supposedly it's sweet. And they enjoyed it. And then they all just died from it. Figuratively. CNN decided to consume the little apple of death because it tasted good. It was there. It was a short-term gain. And now what? These people are jumping ship. What, Jeff Zucker's apparently going to leave the network now? Been there, done that. You know what? If that's the case, I can only say thank you to these people. Maybe it was bad in the long run. Maybe it was destructive. Maybe, our institutions are heavily influenced now by extremism and cultist leftism and things like that. But maybe that's the shock to the system it needed. They shoved CNN so far down to the Trump derangement universe that when Trump left, everything now there's no resources anymore. They played a dirty game. And I'll tell you what I'll do. There's always something for me to talk about because I just talk about what I care about. And if my ratings go down, it doesn't matter because I'm not running a newsroom with, hundreds of employees. And I'm not making content for the sake of pissing off anti-Trump people. I'm just going to talk about what I want to talk about. Typically, I rag on the media. Well, as the media gets more and more desperate and their corporations collapse, I guess I'll have more to talk about, right? And there it is. Joe Biden's ratings in the trash. Traditional liberals will not be there to support any of these people because they're not paying attention anymore. With news ratings down and Biden's speech ratings down, how will the Democrats win in 2022 and 2024? I don't know. They're not going to be able to muster up the same amount of anger. And that means now the Republicans have the advantage. Make your move while they're sleeping. We'll see how that plays out. Next segment is coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.